invasion had failed. The presence of the invaders in Johnson County was no longer a secret. The cattle barons did not eliminate their economic and political rivals in the county. After the murder of Nate Champion and Nick Ray, the invaders moved north to Buffalo to complete their mission. On their way to Buffalo, the invaders received news that the citizens of the county were up in arms, and a force of around 250 men were headed in their direction.
Somebody warned the town and everybody's roused. Rustlers massing for miles around. Get some cover if you...
Wolcott and the others decided the best course of action was to fall back to the TA Ranch, fortify it, and hope to get word to their friends in Washington to send help. Again, Wolcott and Canton differed in the course of action to take. Canton wanted to go on to Buffalo, believing that the majority of the citizens would support the cattle barons. Canton was wrong. Buffalo merchants opened their stores and gave the posse members guns and ammunition. One 18-year-old, George Campbell, who along with his friends and family believed the big cattlemen were responsible for the assassinations of Tisdale and Jones and wanted to rid the county of small ranchers and homesteaders. The TA Ranch headquarters set in a bend in the Crazy Woman Creek and consisted of a ranch house, a large barn, and a few outbuildings. The barn, the stable, and ranch house were fortified, as well as an ice house. In addition, the defenders dug trenches and built a structure on a knoll west of the main buildings, dubbed the fort. These structures were fortified with lumber, hay bales, and feed bags. Loopholes were also cut in the walls of the buildings to provide added fields of fire. The ranch structures still stand, and the effects of the siege can be seen in the barn and ranch house today. The first elements of the posse arrived around midnight of April the 11th and surrounded the whole ranch. They dug rifle pits for cover and killed the invaders' horses to prevent them from escaping. The posse realized they had the invaders in a trap and only needed to proceed with caution and patience.
How many do you make out?
About 200 and more coming along the ridge.
Well, Don't worry, we've made these buildings practically impregnable to rifle fire. All we have to do is wait for our people to come through.
Major.
You see anything?
Our wagons, are they here?
That's right, Major. They're being captured along with our dynamite and everything else. How impregnable do you think these buildings would be to that?
They wouldn't dare.
Why not? We would.
Later that day, the posse captured the invaders' supply wagons, which included thousands of rounds of ammunition, 2 cases of dynamite, and Canton's valise, which had a copy of the death list of By the end of the day, the posse numbered around 300 men. The telegraph lines, which had been cut by the cattlemen to prevent the Johnson County officials requesting aid from the state and keeping information about the invasion from being public knowledge, remained down. This was now a problem for the invaders, who recognized their dire peril and needed to get a message to Governor Barber in Cheyenne. Wolcott prepared a message to the governor. One young man volunteered to try and get through the lines to Buffalo. After a harrowing adventure of wading through icy creeks and running into a group of besiegers, he obtained a horse and quickly rode to Buffalo. Once in Buffalo, he presented the message to 2 of Canton's allies. However, the telegraph in Buffalo was not operational. The men had to ride south to Douglas, 100 miles away or beyond, until they could find an operational telegraph. Meanwhile, the situation for the invaders became more precarious. The posse kept a continuous fire on the invaders and moved closer to the buildings, making it dangerous for any of them to move from cover. The besiegers realized it would be difficult to drive the invaders out of their fortifications with rifle and pistol fire only. They needed more powerful firepower. A request was made to the Army at Fort McKinney for a cannon. The request, however, was denied. The posse had dynamite, thanks to the invaders. The problem was how to safely get close enough to the buildings to throw the dynamite. The solution was to build a moving device called the Ark of Safety, or Go Devil. This device would provide cover for the besiegers and let them get within throwing distance of the buildings. The Ark was only one element of the invaders' difficulty. The size of the posse was increasing. Over 400 men were now besieging the ranch, and the invaders' ammunition and food were almost depleted. The posse kept the invaders trapped in their fortified buildings on the TA Ranch. WSGA supporters were frantically making efforts in Cheyenne and Washington, D.C. to save them. On April the 12th, Governor Barber received word regarding the situation in Johnson County and the predicament of the invaders. That evening, he sent a telegraph to President Benjamin Harrison stating, "An insurrection exists in Johnson County against the government of said state. The governor claimed the stock owners had gone to Johnson County to protect their livestock and were being attacked by the sheriff and rustlers. The Telegraph concluded the civil authorities are unable to prevent violence. The situation is serious, and immediate assistance will probably prevent great loss of life. Somehow, the telegraph from Governor Barber did not reach President Harrison. So Barber notified the two Wyoming senators, Joseph Carey and Francis Warren. They went to the White House in the middle of the night, woke the president, and impressed upon him the significance of the insurrection. Convinced of the seriousness of the situation by the two Wyoming senators, the president directed the Secretary of the Army to send troops to prevent violence and preserve the peace. At 2 a.m., troopers of the 6th Cavalry departed Fort McKinney to the TA Ranch. They arrived at sunrise as the posse was moving the arc of safety towards the buildings of the ranch. Sheriff Angus agreed for the invaders to surrender to the Army with the understanding they would be protected by the military but handed over to civilian authorities for trial. Wilcock willingly surrendered to the Army. After the invaders surrendered, the Army took possession of their guns and ammunition and escorted them to Fort McKinney. The march to the fort occurred without incident, and the posse dispersed. The saga of the Johnson County War was not over, however. Ill feelings were running high, and legal authorities in the county began to prepare murder charges on all the invaders. The WSGA legal team was busy subverting the justice system. The WSGA lawyers were able to get the court to order the trial of the invaders moved from Buffalo to Cheyenne. On April 16th, the invaders were marched out of Fort McKinney under a military detachment and marched to Douglas, where they boarded a train for Fort D.A. Russell outside of Cheyenne. They were housed on the fort because the Laramie County Jail could not house the large number of prisoners. The prisoners were free to roam the fort as long as they returned to their barracks at night. Throughout the summer, the legal fight over the location and date of the trial continued. Johnson County could no longer afford to keep the prisoners confined, so the judge released all the prisoners with the admonition to return once the date and location of the trial was established. While the WSGA Invasion Army and its gunmen were defeated, death and injury were not over. In May 1892, George Wellman was shot from ambush near the old Fort Reno. Wellman was appointed U.S. Marshal and had connections with the WSGA. In spite of his association with the cattle barons, Wellman was well liked in the county, and his death was mourned by many. His killer was never identified. Even the Army was not immune to violence. A group of cowboys came on to Fort McKinney, set fire to the commissary, and planted a bomb in the stove of a barracks. The fire was extinguished, but the bomb exploded, injuring First Lieutenant Gatewood so badly he had to be medically discharged. The Ninth Cavalry, an all-black regiment, was soon ordered to replace the 6th at Fort McKinney. Influential cattlemen in the state believed the troopers of the 6th were too sympathetic towards the homesteaders. The Buffalo soldiers were unpopular in the county, and gunfights occurred between soldiers and the settlers, resulting in 2 troopers being killed. The 9th was soon transferred, and 2 years later, Fort McKinney was closed. In the fall of '92, 2 alleged rustlers were shot. Again, the murders were never solved. The final death in the Johnson County War occurred a year later in May 1893, when Dudley Champion, seen at the far right of this photo, and brother of Nate Champion, was killed in cold blood by WSGA member Mike Shaughnessy. Shaughnessy was one of the men responsible for the death of Nate Champion. The murder was initially ruled self-defense. Shaughnessy, however, left Wyoming before further investigations could be concluded. What happened to the invaders? Were they ever brought to justice? No trial date was ever set, and no one was ever punished for the deaths resulting from the WSGA invasion of Johnson County. Thank you very much for watching this video. It is greatly appreciated. If you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, and make a comment.